Hello. Welcome to Managing Supply Chain Risks, presented by the School of Business and Management at City University of Seattle and our Learn with CityU initiative. For more live and recorded resources, please visit cityU.edu/learn-with-CityU. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Jason Elliott, Vice President of Marketing and Enrollment at City University. We would like this to be an interactive event. We're excited to take your questions at the end of the discussion. So please put any questions within the Zoom chat feature. We'll answer them after this facilitated Q&A. We will be recording the presentation as well as the follow-up Q&A. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing the moderator for this evening session and the Dean of our School of Business and Management, Dr. Sumatra Ngupta.
Thank you, Jason, and welcome to all the participants, and in particular, our distinguished guest, Shaun Harris. And Shaun is with Slalom Consulting. He joined them in 2021 after spending 16 years in global agribusiness in various capacities, such as Director of Global Planning, as well as Business Development. Shaun received his undergraduate degree in International Business and Japanese from Oregon State University and his Executive MBA from Foster School of Business at University of Washington. Shaun is a member of the Advisory Council for City University School of Business and Management, and it is my pleasure to introduce and interview Shaun Harris. Welcome, Shaun.
Thank you. Hello, great to be here. Nice to see everybody.
Shaun, we have an exciting time going on in the world of supply chain. Supply chains have always had risk inherently built into them, but the new pandemic seems to have increased risk levels and brought new risks into global supply chains. What is your viewpoint on what's going on in today's world?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the easiest way I think is to look back on how we've seen things over the past 10 to 20 years. We've been really focused on making things efficient, lean manufacturing, just-in-time manufacturing, you know, the ERPs and the technology systems to support it. Really, everybody has become really efficient at producing, assembling, distributing at a really low cost. Now, most of us, not all of us, have woken up to focusing a bit more on resiliency. Things like, what are the top 10 things that could go wrong in my supply chain? How do we address those? We need to be a bit more agile than we have been in the past. That requires really rethinking how we structure that end-to-end value chain. Some of the questions we need to be asking are, where are the buffers in your supply chain? Where are we pooling inventory? What scenarios were we planning for? Which ones are we ready for? Which ones do we still need to prepare a little bit more for?
So when you lay out this agenda, Shaun, especially with the fact that we have leaned and gone so far into just-in-time, do you think there's an easy fix to the issues we are seeing in today's supply chain and the risks that have come up?
Yeah, you know, tackling this really isn't an easy fix. An additional item I would add to that is that we're, in the US especially, we're seeing, you know, due to lack of other spending outlets, there's a lot more cash available in the market. Consumer demand, in many ways, is 30% above where we were before the pandemic. Supply has been constrained in ways we never imagined. It's quite the curveball. Now, I will say that the winners we've seen thus far aren't the ones who have, you know, been the biggest or the strongest. It's really the ones who've maintained control of their supply chains. It's the ones that understood it. They knew the steps along the way. They knew who to call when there was an issue. They're the ones that saw the problems coming before when something could be done about it. And they've been able to respond a little bit better. I think that's a bit of the playbook that we're going to see moving forward.
So Sorry, Shaun, if you take a page book from an industry that we both serve, which is agriculture, and what parallels would you draw? Because the agriculture supply chain has a lot of unique features when it comes to risks. What do you think we could learn from what was going on or what's been in that field and
Yeah,
today's market?
yeah, definitely. You know, as you'll remember, when we worked in agriculture together, volatility was something we dealt with all the time. One area had a great harvest, another area had a rough one. One was having, you know, high milk prices or grain prices. Another was, you know, low. You know, there's a real push down pop-up effect that comes with that. And we, you know, in that industry, we didn't have the luxury of being allowed to have a disruption. We had to deliver or the animals didn't eat and the people didn't eat. And what do we do to solve that? You know, we sourced from a lot of areas. Some didn't make total economic sense at the time, but they've really been a big help this past year with all the instability. You know, we did other things. We pooled our inventory as close to the end user as we could. We worked really, really closely with our logistics partners to make sure we had the resources to get there. And we also did a lot of vertical integration to make sure we had the control over things and where they were coming from. Not just in agriculture in the future. I think you'll see a lot more people doing that in the future.
That's actually great. So what you're saying is that inventory isn't all bad, because we've been trained to say inventory is not. So what you're saying is maybe inventory, it depends. That's what I heard you say. So let's continue on that tone. If you are to take a look at some new risk mitigation strategies that our people are applying and deploying today, what would you say are some of those strategies that you're seeing as you serve clients across the globe?
Yeah, you know, I would just on your point on inventory, I would say it's something like, you know, +1 point for reducing inventory, +2 points for putting inventory in just the right spot. So it's a real balance. But, you know, as far as mitigating risk and where your supply chain can kind of fall apart, I think it's easiest to look at it and, you know, your issues can really arise with your suppliers, with your logistics providers, or with some big swing in demand. And one of the things, you know, we like to focus on is where your buffers are. Where in your value chain are you pooling your inventory? Most often, not always, you want to get those buffers as close to the end user as possible. Other times, you really want those buffers in the most flexible spot in your supply chain where you can still make a decision on what to do with it. Another really important thing to watch out for is getting the signals from the places that matter. If you're looking in the wrong spot for where your demand's coming from, it can make things get pretty wild. And we've seen some pretty interesting demand signals, you know, through the pandemic as people have shifted their behaviors. I think one misconception I would mention is this idea, you know, in an agile supply chain that you just need to be infinitely flexible in all areas to do all kinds of things at a moment's notice. And I don't think that's really the most productive way to solve your supply chain issues.
So what I heard you say is pooling of inventory, figuring out buffer points, potentially redesigning parts of your supply chain. Are there some examples that you think of companies that are doing it right that come to mind?
You know, one of the big winners I would mention is companies like Amazon. You know, Amazon's been really able to rise to meet the demand that's come their way. But when you think about it, much of how Amazon is structured is really, really rigid. When you want to get something from Amazon, you have to put that order in just the right way or it's not going in. But yet, there's areas where they're also incredibly flexible that allows them to meet the demand they've seen. Another really unique example I'd say is BMW and their approach to battery electric vehicles. You know, for example, with Tesla, you can choose between a car or an SUV, big or small. Not a lot of choices out there. But with BMW, they plan to put all of their cars and offer them in a way that's platform agnostic. Pick the car, and then you tell them how you want to power it. You want diesel, you want gas, you want battery. And now there's downsides associated with that approach, but with that, it gives them the flexibility to have the same rigorous R&D, the same design, the same manufacturing lines, the same factories, but lets them to be flexible in which power unit they're putting in the car. So really, it's a matter of understanding where you want to be rigorous and where you want to be a little more flexible, and striking that balance in a way that works for your business.
Very interesting approach to design. So now let's tackle slightly more downstream. So let's say we've got a great design and a great business model. Do the old concept of people, process, and technology still play a role? Or is this just going to happen on its own?
I think still today, people, process, technology is the centerpiece of any good approach to supply chain. To get a handle on your supply chain, it's really important to address it in that order. Because really, you start with the people, you start with the process. You want to make sure you're asking the right questions, generating the right curiosity, having the right conversations. And with that comes the mindset, the culture to enable the use of technology. Sometimes I like to just approach things with a notepad, try to do the whole process on a piece of paper. Before you get in Excel, before you even try to get it in an ERP, really try to sketch it out, work out the kinks. You know, I guarantee you something will come up that you might not expect. And really with that approach, it forces you to boil things down to the simplest possible framework and make sure you're really kind of directionally correct before you take on the bigger stuff. There's plenty of time to add more complexity later. I think there's a real misconception I would mention, that you can just go spend money on technology and everything else will kind of come together. And I haven't really seen that work. I think it's really important you get the people, you get the processes in place. Otherwise, you're just really recycling bad processes. And then from there, you know, technology becomes a superpower. It lets you do the things that wouldn't otherwise be possible. So, you know, you really want to get your people, your processes in place, get directionally correct, and then use that technology to take it to the next level.
So what I heard you say, Shaun, is lead with people and process, get it right. Technology will always support, and don't try to boil the ocean in one go, because you said let it come slowly. Here's a question for you. At City University, we have a huge focus on data-driven supply chains and artificially enabled, intelligence-enabled supply chain. What's your view on data and its usage in supply chains?
I would argue, you know, the fourth component to that, after your people, process, technology, is really data, or analytics, let's say. You know, that's really a separate conversation from the technology. And I think it's great that City University is approaching it as such. Making sure you have the right data to look at, getting it cleaned up, you know, really make sure everybody's looking at that data in the same way. And to me, that's just as important as the first three: the people, the process, the technology, and the data.
Could you highlight a little bit, Shaun? You mentioned something on people before. You said culture does matter. And I remember there's a famous quotation by Peter Drucker where he said, "Culture eats strategy for breakfast." I think he wrote that quote years ago. What's your view? You've worked all over the world. What's your view on how culture impacts supply chain transformations?
Yeah, that's a really important one. You know, I think we all do things a little bit differently, and it's important to understand where you're similar, where you're different. But I think, you know, when it comes to supply chain, it's pretty culture agnostic. It's a matter of getting things from point A to point B in a way that aligns with the goals and the strategy of the business. And when you set up your supply chain that way, you really get down to the culture of the company. And that's where you really want to look at what you're doing to reinforce the values you want reflected in your supply chain. What kind of institutions do you have in place? What kind of myths and what kind of legends? And how do you carry forward the way you operate as a company? I think that's really important in kind of getting to that next level with your supply chain.
Thank you. Let's switch gears into your current role. Slalom Consulting has grown amazingly. Started in Seattle. I believe you guys might be up to 1,200, 1,300 consultants all over, maybe even global. What kind of work is Slalom doing to help their clients in supply chain?
I think simply put, we really help our clients show the art, we show the art of the possible. We start by really taking a look at what do you want to become? Well, let's see what might be achievable, what might be desirable. I think, there's the old saying, the smartest person in the room is the one who came from 1,000 miles away. And I don't think it's quite that simple, but it really starts from offering a fresh perspective. From there, we create a path forward. We help ensure what we're looking at is the right set of numbers, set of questions. We're asking the right questions along the way. And I think at Slalom, we really like to work alongside you. We want to make sure we're moving in the right directions. We're going to tweak things as we go. We all know the best laid plans can change mid-course, so it's really important to move as you go. I'll just mention a bit about Slalom. We're very proud to be, founded and headquartered here in Seattle. We've had a lot of growth, like you mentioned, and we're actually now over 11,000 employees. Our focus is on strategy, technology, business transformation. We were really kind of founded on that idea that consulting doesn't need to be this grueling road warrior career. We live where we work, and we typically are very active in the communities we serve.
Very good. Having competed against Slalom in past lives, I can attest to the fact that you guys are a very good firm. So congratulations. Questions now is, well, we're a university and we are a dominant player in the market. What role do you think universities play in furthering the cause of supply chain to help practitioners such as yourself and the overall field?
Yeah, I mean, that's, it used to be there was supply chain programs and they kind of took a back burner to the more attractive ones. These days, it seems that supply chain is really the solution to a lot of issues we're seeing. I think for me, it's about learning how to look at things, learning how to have the right toolkit to take some of those first steps. Obviously, in university, you want to be, getting the basics of finance, the accounting, the marketing, but really knowing how to use it, knowing how to apply it. Learn how to put a process down on paper, learn the right questions to ask, learn the right conversations to have, learn how to frame up the situations you're encountering. That's not really the easy part of things, but if you can get a few steps along that way in the university, I think it really helps applying it in the real world. I think to that end, I'm honored to be serving on the advisory council of the School of Business and Marketing, Business Management, sorry. And I understand CityU will also start offering some new degrees in supply chain, which is very exciting.
Thank you, Shaun. We are definitely trying to make a difference in our regional market and actually national market. And so we're excited. And we're excited to have you on board. We have a lot of students, several that are listening in. What advice would you have for practitioners or for people that are trying to enter the field and become active supply chain practitioners?
Yeah, great question. I think supply chain can be a lot of different things to a lot of different people. Just to me, it's really the structure of how you get things from point A to point B. And that really just sounds like business or management in general. So I'd encourage folks to get into a role where they can see things as broadly as possible, not just one where you're in your own wheelhouse, understand how things always connect, and then keep asking, so what? What do we get from this? I think, as you'll remember, when we worked in agriculture, it was implicit. You had to understand things from end to end. There were just too many places to get lost between the seed on the ground and the end user overseas. For me, I've really enjoyed consulting as a way to see a lot of different industries. You suddenly have a broader perspective in a lot of different companies. Every project you do is just another data point that kind of helps come together in a way that can be really impactful. After a few projects, you can suddenly kind of triangulate and draw insight on things you couldn't previously. I think the other tidbit I would give is that just know that career progression isn't a straight line. I think being a little further along in my career now, that straight line approach kind of sounds boring. Allow yourself to bounce around a bit. Get strong in one area, strengthen those muscles, try something new, strengthen those. all the while, you become a little more well-rounded in the process. I'd encourage anyone at any age to really not be afraid to take that leap into something new and try a new field.
So you are strongly suggesting pivoting your career as required and exploring consulting as a profession. I would second that, having spent many years in that field as well. When you look back at your career now, which is over 17 years, is there a particular supply chain problem that comes to mind that has been a difficult problem that you thought you couldn't crack, but then you ended up being able to solve the problem? Is there a particular one that has remained with you?
I think more than the squeeze that we're seeing right now, the one that I would have to say is the trade war with China in 2017, 2018. During that period, in the products we handled, we saw demand for US product that suddenly became more expensive in China plummet. And China still needed the product, it just required it from somewhere else. And China ended up sourcing these products from all kinds of places they didn't previously. Most of that came from Europe. And all those places that were buying European product suddenly needed that product as well, so that they had to get it from the US. So you saw this real push down, pop up shift in the supply chain. And it was quite a big reshuffle. It was about 6 months of chaos. And then when the tariffs went away, it took a few months to get back to that new normal. And a lot of those supply chains didn't completely revert back to the US.
So, final question for you before I revert it to Jason for questions from our chat box. Do you think 2022 is going to be a smoother year than 2021 for supply chains, or do you think we are facing a few years of supply chain backlogs and it's going to take some time? What's your view?
Boy, I would like to think the worst of it is over. In a lot of industries, a lot of people have gotten a lot smarter at becoming a little more resilient, like we spoke about. But I still think in many areas we're in the middle of a kind of that classic bullwhip effect where the problems kind of come in waves. I think we could still see a few more shakes of that bullwhip, so to speak. But if we don't have any more disruptions like Omicron or whatnot, I think the worst of it should be over.
Shaun,
the big thing,
go ahead, Shaun.
I would say one thing to watch for is overstocks. I think, we're seeing the shortages. The shortages are very apparent. But a lot of products that people thought there was demand for, turns out there isn't demand. So, those are sitting in warehouses right now. And I think clearing that out will take quite a bit of work.
So this goes back to your point on getting clear demand signals that you can understand to plan your buffer. So and you think that's going to take a few years for us do you think 2022 and maybe into 2023, we're still going to be facing some of the same issues, maybe not as severe as 2021?
Yeah, I mean, if I had a crystal ball, I would say sometime in 2024 we start seeing this come to a close. I think it's still going to be tough to get a new pickup truck this whole calendar year. I think computer chips are still going to be a squeeze throughout this whole year. I think the best hope right now is we can see a lot of those really key crunches settle sometime in 2023.
Shaun, it has been an absolute pleasure to chat with you. And so let me recap what I heard you say. We talked about design, very important. People, process, technology, but your ad was that data is something that has to be included in that. If not, it's probably just as important, if not more, but treat it as a separate segment on its own. You discussed or you mentioned culture being important, but probably supply chains are culture agnostic. And your other prediction was that 2022 is going to be tough, but not as tough as 2021. And when it's all said and done, I will add the two things you did mention is Slalom can help companies solve the problem, and that CityU obviously is producing the right type of products in the market to help students. Did I sum up our conversation efficiently?
I would say so. Thank you. You did it well, like I've seen in many in the consulting field.
And with that, I will turn it back to our moderator, Jason Elliott, our Vice President and of Enrollment and Marketing. And I believe there's a few questions that Jason will send to Shaun. Thank you, Jason.
Yeah, this was really great. Some of the questions that are coming in, one attendee asked, gentlemen, what are some of the local companies that could use a graduate with a specialty in supply chain management? What would you advise, or what would you suggest someone who's on that pathway or getting ready to graduate?
You know, I wouldn't. You know, I think supply chain is a good buzzword now. I think there's probably more positions than there were a few years ago. I wouldn't limit yourself just to a supply chain role. I'd look in operational roles. I think any company moving things from point A to point B, any company making things would be a great one to look into. I think there's a lot of companies with a real dedicated supply chain function. I know Amazon has a lot of supply chain focused roles, but I wouldn't limit myself just to that. I'd really look into that broad operational business operations perspective.
Thank you. Another question we got was, what technologies do you envision coming online today that may impact the future of the supply chain tomorrow?
You know, I think in regard to technology, we've really seen over the last 20 years, there's been a big shift to ERPs. And if you're using SAP or you're using Oracle or whatnot, you're using the supply chain related solution that Oracle provides or SAP provides. But you know, we've seen, and it's been helpful for Slalom. We are very much technology agnostic. We like to find the best solution for our clients, regardless of whatever affiliations we have. You know, we've seen a lot of supply chain focused solutions that connect very well with legacy ERP systems that have kind of helped companies see their supply chains in new ways. I think a lot of the things moving forward we're going to see is visibility. You know, visibility for your supply chain. And when I say visibility, that doesn't just, it's on kind of on two dimensions. It doesn't just mean seeing things from end to end. It also means seeing into the future. And if you can get a good signal of what's going to be coming down the line, you know, 2-3 years from now, you can often deal with problems while they can still be addressed.
Another question we got was to you, Shaun, what drove you specifically to choose consulting as your profession after several years in the industry?
That's a really good question. You know, I think I just wanted the skills that you see in good consultants. I'd worked with a lot of consultants before. I was always impressed with how a good consultant can really dive into the middle of a problem, get to the bottom of it, and then very quickly articulate some solutions. I figured it was kind of time for me to build those skills. One benefit I didn't expect from it is that I really like solving those problems. I think approaching things with a fresh perspective and adding value from that perspective can be very worthwhile.
The questions are coming fast. If you had to pick one aspect of supply chain management to highlight as an area of focus in the next 5 years, what would that be? Or are there a few areas that come to mind?
You know, I think the big buzzword right now is agility. How do we adapt things coming our way? I think we touched on that a bit earlier, but I think the bigger one is really visibility. And like I mentioned, it's visibility on you know, seeing things along the value chain, understanding where products are coming from. I was talking to someone who manufactures electric motors, and they said their supply chain went 16 layers deep. So to get an electric motor to go in a small electronic, you have to go 16 tiers deep into the supply chain to understand it all. I think I think to be able to do that without getting lost is really going to be the next big technology we see.
Another question here is, what's the toughest supply chain problem you've had to tackle so far in your career?
I think of one specific one. I think the toughest supply chain problem I've dealt with is really big swings in demand. If you can't predict what's coming your way, it's really, really tough to structure your supply chain around. I was working with a client recently on cell therapy, and it was a recently approved treatment recently approved by the FDA, and they turned out they set up the factories for these to scale up and do more products. And it turns out it's really tough to forecast demand when you don't know whether that patient's coming in or not. And so I think structuring things around consistent demand is the easiest, and then when demand becomes more unstable, it's a lot tougher to structure your supply chain.
Another question was asked, are the supply chain issues that you were seeing about getting goods from overseas to the US, or are there issues passing goods within North America as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think the big constraint that's been most visible in the news has been the port situation, getting goods into the US. But I think if you want, US produced timber, for example, has very little dependencies on overseas supply chains, you're still seeing issues like that. And I think that's just kind of a knock-on effect from a lot of the other bottlenecks that we've seen.
I think those might be all the questions so far. So I just want to say thank you, Shaun, for your wisdom. This has been really illuminating and helpful for me, and I hope for all of the attendees. And our next session will be on February 23rd, 2022 at 6 p.m. And the topic is shifting global healthcare trends in Africa during the pandemic. And so for more live and recorded resources like this one, as we mentioned earlier, you can go to cityU.edu/learnwithCityU. If you have specific questions about some of the programs that we offer or how you could get started, you can go to our website or contact Teresa D'Ambrosio, whose email is listed there, as is her phone number. She's our Director of Enrollment and Advising, so she'll be able to provide some information on whether you are a future student or a current student or need any guidance there. And then for this webinar, we're going to be posting a recording of it on our website and our Vimeo channel. So we'll send a link to the recording soon. And we just want to say thank you for joining us on behalf of Shaun, Dr. Ngupta, and myself. Thank you so much, and we are so glad that you were here tonight. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Shaun.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.